Well, hello and welcome, and thank you for joining me for this session called Love Your CMS, an overview of Craft. Sorry, we're starting just a few minutes late here, having some microphone problems, but I think we're all set now. So I know there are at least two other talks happening today about Craft, and this one's really designed to be a high-level summary. We're not going to dig into much code during the talk, but I did want to leave time for Q&A. And honestly, chime in if you have questions about what we're talking about at the time. If something piques your curiosity, if you want to dive a little deeper into something I mentioned, speak up and we can make this kind of an interactive conversation. I'm totally fine with that. First, a little bit about myself. My name is Greg Jenkins. I'm a web developer at HappyCog, and my personal CMS journey so far looks a little bit like this. Started around 2008, beginning to build websites in WordPress. In fact, the very first time I downloaded a WordPress theme and started to take it apart and try to put it back together, I was having a really difficult time really understanding what was going on until I realized that the HTML classes were all in Spanish, and I'm not a Spanish language speaker, so the header class was a cabeza class and so on. So after I got over that hurdle, it all started to click, and I loved using WordPress and used WordPress until switching to Expression Engine around 2011. And we can talk a little bit about Expression Engine's connection to Craft in a minute, but in 2014, I started using Craft and really haven't looked back. There were a couple Statomix sites in there as well. A little bit about HappyCog, the agency that I work at. We're a full service digital agency of about 65 people, and typically we're headquartered on Madison Avenue in New York City, but currently we're headquartered in apartments and living rooms and basements all around the country. And at the moment, most of the world is working remotely, but even before this pandemic, we are a distributed team, and I'm actually based out of Ohio, where I'm joining you from this morning. We have quite a few team members that are based in Philly as well. We work with many CMSs from the two that I got my start with, WordPress and Expression Engine, but as well Drupal, Sitecore, and certainly Craft, which in many cases has become our go-to CMS these days. I did a quick search on our GitHub team today for the word craft, and there's 65 craft sites on our GitHub account, and that number is probably a little small because some sites end up on client accounts. So be safe to say probably close to 100 craft sites from HappyCog over the last few years. We're an official Craft partner, and currently all the projects I'm working on are Craft projects. So for today, a few things I want to cover. I really want to start with Craft 101, just like a really high level look at what it is and what it can do and kind of the philosophy and big ideas behind Craft. Then I want to talk about what do developers love about Craft, what do clients love about Craft, and what's next for Craft, kind of some exciting roadmap stuff and kind of what's on the horizon there. So for what developers love about Craft and what clients love about Craft, those are both from experience building sites, also just from talking with colleagues at HappyCog. This week I've been putting up a bunch of Slack polls and surveys asking them, what do your clients say? What's your favorite thing about Craft? And things like that. So that's where a lot of this information is coming from. So let's start with Craft 101. A little bit of history. The company behind Craft is called Pixel and Tonic, and they got recognition around 2010 for creating these must-have, like must-install plugins for Expression Engine. At the time, it was just a developer named Brandon Kelly, but his plugins like Wigwam, Assets, Playa, Matrix, and FieldPack were like instantly installed on every Expression Engine site that I worked on, just opening up tons of new functionality. They really became essential, and in my mind, it was just inseparable from Expression Engine itself. And Brandon really built on the open-ended philosophy behind Expression Engine and built all of the concepts for those plugins into the core functionality of Craft when it launched in 2011. Fast forward to today, 2020, now the team at Pixel and Tonic has grown. I don't know, there's 10, 12 people on their team, and they're on version 3.4 with 4.0 due to be released this year. And the platform just continues to kind of grow in popularity and use and features. And a few quick little snapshots from Craft I pulled off of their website. More than 4,000 devs are part of their online community, which is Discord, very similar to Slack. And there's just tons of channels for different versions of Slack, plugin development, issues, show and tell, like show off the new site you made. There's just tons of people there. It's where you'll get a hold of the actual people who are working on the code. It's where you can get a hold of people who built the plugins that you're using. So it's a great active community. They have 177 partner agencies that they work closely with and support, and there are more than 70,000 sites that have been created on the platform. The chart here kind of shows a general up and to the right trend of Craft's market share. What you're looking at there is 3 lines. I think the red one is like how many Craft sites there are in the top 1 million websites. And I think the blue and green are the top 10,000 and the top 1,000. So at the left hand you have 2013, and on the right hand you have 2019. And so the popularity and growth of Craft just kind of continues. And then at the bottom we have some big brands who trust Craft and use Craft, and the kind of obligatory logo Claud we have there at the bottom. So what is Craft? If you ask them, they'd say something like Craft is a flexible, user-friendly CMS for creating custom digital experiences on the web and beyond, which is great. It definitely is that. But what is it really? That sentence might be a little too high of an overview. So digging a little deeper into the actual nuts and bolts of Craft, it's a self-hosted PHP 7 application. It's built on the Yi2 framework, and it can connect to MySQL and Postgres for content storage, and the templating is powered by Twig. Just a few other really high-level kind of marketing bullet points for Craft. It boasts an intuitive, user-friendly control panel. This is something that I've seen firsthand, but I've also, clients just love to use Craft because it's organized in a way that is intuitive, makes sense, and is really usable. The kind of approach to content modeling is really this clean slate approach, and we're going to get into that a lot more as we talk about what developers love about Craft. There's a built-in plugin store with hundreds of free and commercial plugins. Again, we're going to talk a little bit more about extensibility and the plugin ecosystem. And there's a robust framework for supporting the build out of modules and plugins, as well as that active, vibrant community that I talked about. The pro license for Craft costs $299. There's a free version, and you can also just try the pro version for as long as you want, as long as it's not on a public site. So you can develop locally or on like development staging environments. Same with plugins, which is great. You can just try them and build things and not have to pay for something that you don't end up using on a production site. Craft is commercial open source. So to me, and obviously there's a lot of different viewpoints on this, but it's a fantastic price point for the support that you get. And so you know that there's a real company behind it and real support people, and but it's also not going to break the bank. So for a lot of clients and for a lot of websites, the $299 is trivial, but ends up getting you a lot of support and connection to the real developers building the CMS. So let's jump into what do developers love about Craft. This one was the one that just came up over and over. It was the one with all the likes and hearts and stars on Slack when someone mentioned it. So this is a resounding #1, is that Craft is really flexible. You can design and build exactly what you want and nothing else. You start with a blank canvas. And every section, field, and relationship are custom, so your content model is preserved perfectly. So what I mean by that, in the world of Craft, when you start up a new install, I always kind of go back to my WordPress days of starting with this idea of pages and posts. You don't even start with pages or posts in Craft because you might not have pages somehow, or you may not have posts, or so all of your content gets to be modeled, and there's this really high fidelity reflection of the real world data in your content model. So that's fantastic. #2, it's 100% custom. So this is really maybe another way of saying the same thing, but Craft doesn't assume anything about what you're building. So your sections and your entry types map to your real world data, and you have these intuitive connections between them. So in our little example on the left, you've got a drink and it has a recipe and it has directions, but it also connects to other related recipes or ingredients, and those ingredients have metadata about them, and you're able to build out these really rich and really intuitive representations of your data. Our author experience lead at HappyCog, who really his job is to make the CMS experience wonderful for the client. He was, just saying Craft conforms to you and not the other way around, which I couldn't agree with more. It's extensible. So Craft includes a full suite of libraries and APIs that plugins can tap into. I mentioned before that there's this official plugins store full of hundreds of free and commercial plugins. It's also worth mentioning that every CMS is a little different on how reliant you are on plugins to do certain things. And I would just say in my experience, you're not super beholden to plugins. Like I was mentioning in the expression engine, 2012, I would fire it up and then I would automatically install a handful of plugins. I wouldn't say that's the case with Craft. There are certainly ones that I go to over and over that just do a lot of heavy lifting on SEO or big complicated navigation structure, but it's certainly not a necessary thing. And on the technical side, Craft uses Composer to manage all of your dependencies. It uses Composer for installation of the actual CMS, and to manage versions and versions of plugins. And so that's fantastic when you're working with a group of developers and you're locally installing a plugin, you're committing that Composer change, you're pushing it, and then you're making sure everyone is all on the same page as far as plugins and versions and all of that go. So that's really wonderful. With Craft, one of the best ways to actually build plugins, and I should say plugins in Craft are these extensions to the code that have some sort of control panel manifestation. So fields or settings or whatever you're doing in the control panel to give your plugin data to work with or settings to turn through. And then modules are a similar idea, but without any sort of like control panel implementation. So it's still kind of working with your code, and it's still manipulating things and extending Craft core, but there's no back-end control panel component. One of the best ways to build plugins is to just actually dig into the open source code of the control panel itself, because you get these really perfect example of how to interact with the API. So that's great. #4 thing developers love about Craft is Twig, and a lot of CMSs use Twig or can be set up to use Twig. Craft uses Twig out of the box, and it's kind of assumed, it's definitely integral to Craft. Craft uses Twig as its templating engine on the front end, and that allows you to abstract PHP functions into markup that's easy to type and easy to read. It's also worth noting that your directory structure is completely up to you. So there's no assumptions about you know, inside of a templates directory, you know, where things are and how they include each other or relate to each other. That's really, you know, you're able to customize that completely. A few other really quick kind of lightning round things that developers love about Craft. There's a built-in matrix field. And so without getting too into the weeds, a matrix field really allows you to create these reusable sets of fields that are drag and droppable within a, you know, a field layout. Essentially, this is what powers your page builder type experience or your content block type experience, where you're, let's say, have an about page with a hero image and then a form and then a list of features and then a grid of team members. And all those things can be customized, but they can also be dragged and dropped on top of each other or below each other. They can be removed, they can be doubled up, they can be, you know, and that's what's happening all kind of within this master like matrix field. It allows you to encapsulate a few field types and build out these nice named blocks like hero or team members. And there's no end to the ways that you can get creative with that. Craft is great with multi-site if you have multiple sites that have really similar schema or like data structure. It can handle those really well. So if you had, you know, 3 restaurants that have menu pages and about pages and contact pages and things that match up pretty well, then multi-site is definitely an option. But on the other side, it also out of the box supports localization in a really great way. So having field level translatability for each field, and you can turn that on, you can turn that off, and you can set up different sites and kind of manage them independently with different languages. GraphQL, Element API, and Headless mode all kind of go together in this family where they are kind of abstracting away the front end. It kind of started with Element API, which allowed you to create simple JSON endpoints to get a hold of your data and pull it out of Craft and use it in whatever you want. Use it in your app, use it on another site, connect it, you know, to anything. And that's just been expanded even further with the GraphQL implementation and headless mode, which essentially is running Craft to manage all the content and use the control panel to do all of your, you know, managing of content, and then not use Twig to render any templates on the front end, but essentially just let that server be headless and communicate with whatever is going to consume it, if that's a static site generator or if that's, you know, again, an app or an RSS feed or anything. Project config is fantastic for teams that are working together on sites. And essentially what this is one file that tracks any changes to the control panel settings. So when you make a new field, or you change the name of a field, or you add a new plugin, all of those changes are being tracked in this giant YAML file, which can be obviously version controlled and pushed to the group. And so you're not needing to, you know, make sure you're bringing down those database changes with the database, but anything that doesn't live in the database, so anything that's not content, actually gets tracked and can be, you know, used in a distributed way. Super helpful. A lot of times this is how we will deploy new changes kind of all at once, like building new fields or sections of a site. This can, you know, this project config file can be deployed, and then Craft will consume it and create all of the fields or sections that it needs to do to kind of catch up. And I already mentioned just how wonderful the active community is. So what do clients love about Craft? In my role as a web developer, I've worked at large agencies, I've worked at small agencies, and I've gotten to sit with clients, teach them how to use the CMS, hear about other CMSs they've used or struggles that they have. And I would say time and time again, you know, I've never heard of a CMS that clients enjoy using more. So let's jump in here. The number one reason far and away is live preview. This essentially allows you to, tuck your control panel over to the side of your browser window and then see the real life live front end results of what you're doing in real time. So this is not quite, hitting refresh on a draft. It's much better than that. But it's also not editing your content in place, which in theory I think is kind of a cool idea. You see that on like Squarespace and you see that from time to time, but I think can actually get a little cumbersome. So I think this is a really nice like middle ground where you still have your CMS control panel that you're working with, but it's kind of tightened up and almost displays in like a responsive way on the side. And as you're changing things, you see how that page interacts. Now, clients love this because they don't remember what that one block was called and they just want to see it, or what does this field do? Or, it's just fantastic to be able to see those things before you're saving anything or creating any drafts or doing anything like that. Another fantastic part of Craft is that authors can share a tokenized link to draft content, and they can send it to someone that doesn't even have like access to the CMS. It's just a secure tokenized link that allows you to view that version of a draft. And so if there's some key stakeholders that want to see this new landing page before it goes live, you can do that without making them sign up for Craft or trying to obscure the page in some other way. Clients definitely say that Craft is intuitive to use. I mean, this is kind of just across the board, probably one of the values that Craft has they hold very highly is simple, pretty design, easy to use, minimal. But because like I mentioned before, every section and every field and everything is custom for each site, when a client logs in, they're looking at words and verbiage and phrases that make sense to them because they map to their actual business and their goals and their departments. And so they're not having to remember that, oh, a team member isn't a team member. A team member is a post that has this certain category on it, or, just some other like less than obvious way of dealing with data. There's no need to wrestle content to get it into the right spot. It just fits. Clients even say that Craft is fun to use, which may be an overstatement, but I think it's getting there. For number 3, I have user management. So this is really probably pretty familiar to anyone who's used most content management systems, but I will say that their user management is pretty powerful and allows you to do some pretty specific and granular things and have great control. So you can control groups of members, or you can even just dial into a certain user and dial up their permissions or limit their permissions. And the list of kind of permissions that each individual or group has is this giant checklist that just kind of scrolls and scrolls and scrolls. So for every section, can they edit it? Can they change it? Can they publish it? Can they publish live content to it? So you could easily set up a group of people that can make edits to content, but those edits are going to be drafts until someone else comes along and publishes it live. And that's a simple example, but you can get pretty complex with that. There's also some plugins that kind of relate to user management from an SSO, like single sign-on standpoint, and then also even just setting up workflows where an individual maybe gets an email when a new type of blog post draft gets through, and then they know that they have to go and approve that before it goes live, things like that. The last thing here that clients love about Craft is working with assets. Just drag and drop to upload and organize files within Craft's asset folders, and those are all kind of custom and how you want to build them out. And so it can just make your life really easy if you have a certain type of image that you're using on Heroes and you're never going to use the headshot of the CEO in that place. Everything's not just in one place. If you don't want it to be, you can really kind of organize those things out on a per field basis, on a per section basis, on a per user basis. You can do some light image editing in the control panel, but also really importantly, you can set the focal point. So if in this image you see that little dot between the two glasses there, that's the focal point that's set, and that can be used in image transforms, and it can be even consumed like by some CSS that would, rework how that image is actually laying out on a page based on where that focus point is being applied. It can just be really nice, especially on big hero images where you've got some text and you want, a certain part of the image to land in a certain place. It's great for editorial content and just making sure that things look fantastic. Another thing about assets is that you can really easily store assets in the cloud. There's first-party support out of the box for S3, Google Cloud, and Rackspace. Some really quick other things that clients love about Craft. Craft Commerce is a whole talk. It's a whole conference even. I mean, it's a first-party plugin by the makers of Craft that just extends Craft's functionality to the whole world of products and taxes and shipping. And but it's not this separate part of your site. It's ingrained in the whole content model of everything that you're doing. And so super powerful way of handling commerce, and that's only getting better. Another thing that clients love about Craft is the revisions and drafts. So you can make, go back to, you can set how many revisions you want Craft to remember. Maybe it's 10 out of the box, and you can go back and see that data and recall it and pull it back in. And then on the flip side, you can create drafts and not publish that data obviously until you're ready to do that. There's also soft deleting now as of a version or two ago, which allows you to essentially have that trash can that until you empty it, the thing isn't actually deleted, which is great. There's a lot to say about Craft security. I'm not necessarily a security expert, but I can say that in my experience, I just know that they value security very highly. They have a lot of literature on their website about how the application handles certain security situations. But in the end, it's super secure. And again, there's a handful of things you can do to make that even more secure. Working on a site right now that has no front end login capability to the content, to the control panel. It's all login via a single sign-on platform. So that's fantastic. And clients, do appreciate the cost is low, but also that there is, this product that you're purchasing, and so that there's a certain amount of connection to the developers that are making it, and the support and updates that come with that. So really quickly, what's next for Craft? Craft 4 is due to be released sometime in 2020. They're going to be doing some things around conditional fields, which you can do with some plugins right now. So a really simple version of this would be like, if you flip this switch that says yes or no, then these 3 new fields appear in the back end, or any combination of complex conditional fields that you could do. At this point, you can do all of that in your template and say, if this field does this, then show this or don't show that. Obviously, you can do whatever you want in Twig as far as that goes, but this is just a nice kind of author-centric, client-centric update that will make the backend even more clear and minimal, only showing you what you need when you need it. Nested matrix fields, again, is probably a deep topic, but it's essentially allowing you to put a matrix field inside of a matrix field. So that is slated to come in 2020, but essentially at that point you have this insane recursion of these modular elements that themselves can contain modular elements and infinitely nested forever, and so that's going to be cool. Craft Cloud is a platform that Pixel and Tonic announced last year and plan on launching this year, and that's going to be Headless CMS as a service, and so you're not even going to have to bring your own infrastructure or anything. Essentially, you will get the control panel for Craft in a package that's hosted by them, and then you'll consume, with GraphQL or whatever you want to use to consume that data wherever else you want to. So that's a really interesting idea. And they're going to be doing improvements to their migration system. So right now there's a few ways that you can handle migrations, but it's certainly something that they're putting effort into really making much better. So with that, that's kind of a really high level overview of Craft and what it is. Feel free to reach out to me on the Slack, send me an email. Love to chat with you about any of this stuff. And at this point, if there's any questions about anything I went over, I'd be more than happy to answer those.